Introduction by Thomas Childs Jr. I would like to start with the introduction to this collection that was written by my dear friend Thomas Childs back in 2010. I'm republishing this collection again after it was first published back in January of 2010. At that time, I shared the collection with Thomas and asked if he would write an introduction for me. By the end of the year, I would get married a second time, and upon returning from my second marriage, I heard the tragic news that my dear friend Thomas had died. This was not supposed to happen. Thomas and I were just in our 40s. I had married Elnaz Rezai Galechi from Iran, traveled to Turkey to marry her, and had just spoken to my friend not long before this. It was surreal, a nightmare. I was in denial. A sudden heart attack took my friend in November of 2010. There was a hole in me that I will not fill in ever. This is how I keep my friend alive in me. The following is the introduction written by Thomas Childs. An introduction by Thomas Childs Jr. I first met Bruce nearly 20 years ago. Looking back, we were both idealistic young men with high hopes for the future and a shared passion for poetry. Over the years, we got older and lost touch with each other. However, I feel an affinity with Bruce because even though over the years we may have gotten through trials and tribulations, we have both learned from them. We may have been beaten down, but not defeated. We have not let our demons that haunt us have the last word. And one thing I can say about Bruce is that he has channeled all the hurt and pain he experienced into his poetry. In the wistful, dreamlike visions and the whole story, he talks about a hopeful vision of love that is over too soon, and the possibilities of what could have been but will instead never be. Tears for Grandmother's Passing is a coming to grips with the loss of a loved one. The collection of Christian poems paints a picture of rediscovered spirituality. My personal favorite, however, is Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. In his reflection on that poem, Bruce mentions the poet Anne Sexton's struggles with depression and psychiatric hospitalization, and says she, Sexton, never made it all the way back. I'm so glad I did. That makes two of us, my friend. I can relate. In closing, it is my hope that you enjoy this collection of Bruce Wheelton's poems. In fact, Bruce, I thank you for asking me to write this introduction. It was a singular honor to grant your request. You put your heart and soul for all to see into your writing, and we as readers are richer for it. Wow, I cannot thank my friend enough. There's an addendum to the introduction that follows next. This book does have a number of love poems. I write poems inspired by the love I felt towards some very special people in my life. However, it is a tragic truth that my life has been one that has featured tragedy and loss. What are we when we join with another and become a couple, and then we lose the object of our love? When someone dies so very, very young. In reality, I know that it wouldn't matter how long we lived as husband and wife. Whether the loss came after a week spent together or 50 years of marriage, the pain of losing the one we love is exquisite and singular in quality. I chose the title, What Really Matters, for some words that I started to write to Lynn. I was trying to deal with a whole host of major stressors all at once, and I had lost everything in 2000. I had been weak emotionally and psychologically when Lynn became ill. I wasn't in my right mind. I was overwhelmed. As I was saying, there were other major stressors occurring, colliding all at once beginning in late July of 2000. I experienced the loss of my home, my job, and my career. I used a phrase in a letter to Lynn that all that was somehow less impactful than losing her. Now this book is a statement of that realization, that losing all those other things was less impactful than losing Lynn. I found that working as a therapist, a clinical social worker, is profoundly rewarding. It brought me such joy. I cared deeply about my clients, but I wasn't in love with them. I think of the words by Don Henley in his song New York Minute that go, lying here in the darkness, you hear the sirens wail. Somebody going to emergency. Somebody's going to jail. If you find somebody to love in this world, you better hang on tooth and nail. The wolf is always at the door. In a New York Minute, everything can change. In a New York Minute, things can get a little strange. And in a New York Minute, everything can change in a New York Minute. And in these days when darkness falls early and people rush home to the ones they love, you better take a fool's advice and take care of your own, because one day they're here, next day they're gone. This is what I know. Losing my career, my freedom, my dreams, and my home was so painful and unbearable. Losing the object of my love may be more painful than anything. It was the most depressing event in my life. Why? Because the most joyful moments in my life was when I saw those tears of joy in Lynn's eyes when I gave her our engagement ring. I cannot explain that any better than to say that this is a truth that I know because it's what I have felt. It's a feeling and an experience. Logic and rationality don't make life meaningful. So again, the most joyful moment in my life was when I saw those tears of joy in Lynn's eyes. That's Lynn Denise Krupe, when I gave her our engagement ring. This is hard for me to square with my rational mind that often rejects faith and religion. I'll get back to that in a moment. The first person I ever loved was named Celtic Camille Head, and she died tragically at the end of the year 1990 when she was just 32 years old. Then I found love in Lynn Denise Krupe. We had the chance to live together as husband and wife for many years in the 90s. Could have been forever. At the age of 33, she was fighting for her life. She was born with cystic fibrosis, which causes excess mucus to build up in the body, and this is a breeding ground for infections. These infections cause scarring in the lungs, and they affected her breathing. This left her gasping for air with very low oxygen saturation levels. This and other factors pointed to the unimaginable reality that she might die at any time. So in addition to poems about love, I've also included poems about loss and poems about feeling lost with no sense of who I am, where I'm going, and where I might find a home. I was lost. Reflecting on those moments, thinking of those moments when Lynn is desperately gasping for air is painful beyond words can convey. Some of the poems in the original version of this book, the version Thomas reviewed in creating his introduction, reflected my Christian religious point of view with regard to those things that are of ultimate and lasting value. The demons that Thomas referenced could represent many things. The nightmares are fading, but I do remember what happened. It was worse than what I could have imagined. I was held prisoner by the state after being brutally victimized. This was extremely traumatic, and I had to spend over a year in therapy addressing that experience and so many other experiences when I was literally homeless. I was homeless for much of the period between late 2000 and the year 2006. I was told long ago by a poetry mentor of mine to avoid writing about love because it is hard to say anything new about love. So here I am trying to explain some something important while avoiding the use of cliches. I guess the point is this: there are so many things that are important to me, so many things that bring me joy, but none of that compares to the value of love and the relationships that are or were most dear to me. Maybe that isn't the case for everyone. This book is somewhat philosophical in that I'm seeking to make sense of life. I have decided to include at the end the poems that were in the original version of this book, which reflected my point of view as a Christian believer. At one time, like so many others, I turned to God for support and ultimate meaning. I turned to God for comfort after the loss of Kelta. A Catholic nun taught us a unique form of prayer that included relaxation exercises and then guided visualization. I suppose I needed to visualize being held and nurtured during a time of great distress and grief. So much of what inspires a poet or writer cannot be proven. Feelings just are, and love is. That being said, I think that I want something more than stories in the Bible to be proof to me that there is a God and that the supernatural actually exists. From the standpoint of a believer, it seems so cruel to show someone the pleasures and joys of love and take that all away. For death to come into the life of a couple when they are so young is hard to make sense of as a believer, if I was a believer. Doesn't anything last? I suppose it's poignant the way I heard in one of the last Star Wars movies that no one really dies. Okay, so those that we love will become a part of us forever. That can be uplifting. Think about it. Instead of thinking about our friends and loved ones leaving us, we imagine that they are always a part of us. If we have memories and know what made us who we are now, we always have others that live within us. Maybe it's like the way the words of a great writer live forever. The poems are not in an order chronologically. The loss and trauma part is toward the end. The love I felt for Kelta was the first love I ever knew. She died tragically in a fire at the end of the year when I met her. My love for Ellie is discussed in the first few poems, but this should have remained platonic even though we got married. My love for Lynn was complete, boundless. She is no longer alive. There is a default in the world to think of people as heterosexual, so I tell Ellie that my love is like the love I felt for Thomas. Is one better than the other? When I say my love for Thomas, I mean that my love for Ellie should have been platonic. Nothing more than the love of a friend for another friend, regardless of gender. That's the love that Ellie and I had, and which we still share.